This morning I'm going to talk about the opportunities to try to improve your organization and try to identify the sweet spot where you can have the most impact. Many of the attendees are frequently folks that have the responsibility for process implementation and metrics implementation, and as such, much of my discussion is focused on folks that are associated with this responsibility. Today we're going to talk about visibility, control, and optimization just for a few minutes. Then we're going to talk just briefly about best practices, standard process and why it's important, meaningful metrics, our general failure to date as an industry, the role of automation, and then we're going to talk about how to get started. What we're talking about here is a transformation from the current state to a state where we're more reliable, and to do that, we believe that process and metrics play a key role. We also see that visibility is our starting point, that many of the folks that we talk to as we go around consulting, we discover that one of their biggest challenges is they don't really have the visibility in into their organization that they feel would be necessary for them to be totally effective. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Once you have visibility, the second thing we think you need is a level of control so that you have some standard way that you're doing things. And finally, we believe that once you have that control, then's the time to start thinking about optimization. We discovered that many people who have the role of trying to do process improvement get confused, and they want to start with optimization. And that generally leads to pretty substantial failures. So what we believe is if you are going to try to improve the process of an organization and the effectiveness of the organization, you need to start with a clear understanding of visibility. By visibility, we're talking about insight into people, process, products, and productivity. And we need to recognize that there are many facets to this issue of visibility. Primarily what we're looking for initially is a baseline. We're looking for an ability to see what our current satisfaction levels are, what our current unit costs are, our activity costs, and our productivity levels. Now, for those of you who are not necessarily comfortable with my concept of unit costs, what we're saying is that application development and maintenance involves creating deliverables, and each deliverable is generally could be considered a unit. And that unit may go through several steps like design, code, test, and so forth. The unit costs then are all the costs associated with creating that deliverable. Activity costs are focused on, for example, what are the coding costs, what are the design costs, and having those that matrix breakdown to understand what our costs actually are and be in a position to start to manage those costs. Those, of course, define our productivity level. Visibility also is to identify the people who are doing things very well, understand what they're doing that's different than other parts of our organization, that we can start to take advantage of areas where we have extremely good effectiveness and understand what changes need to be made in the areas where it's not as effective. Control starts with the implementation of standard processes. Standard processes become critical because we need to be able to have meaningful metrics, and metrics aren't meaningful if the processes that they're measuring are not consistent, are not done in a similar way. When we say that something is done, what do we mean by that? What are the considerations around that issue? We want to ensure that performance meets our customers' expectations, and we want to do that in a way that we are able to respond when we start to see decreases in our results, and take action so that we stay within our agreed upon service levels. We need to provide a stable environment, a stable process and improvement environment that allows us to go ahead to the next step and start to experiment through optimization. But what that says is we need to have that baseline in place so that we know what our previous effectiveness was and we can move forward. When we talk about optimization now here, we're talking about experimentation and continuous improvement. We want to make sure that we don't fall in love with particular improvements. We want to instead recognize that if it's not the improvement we thought it was going to be, that we can stop doing it and move on and try a different experiment. See, a lot of people, they think, oh, well, this is going to solve all the problems. They put in place process changes, and in fact, they aren't more effective. In fact, in many cases, they're worse, and yet they are so in love with them that they fail to quickly go back to the previous process and identify what the issues were that they encountered so that as they design the next improvements, they can take those factors into consideration. What we're talking about then is improvement in both efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency here, we're trying to say we want to do the things we do better. Effectiveness, we want to make sure we're doing the right things, do less of the wrong things. See, a lot of people spending time trying to improve processes that should just be eliminated. And one of the key things here of effectiveness is identifying which processes are adding value and eliminating those that are not adding value rather than spending time trying to make the ones that don't add value have a better process orientation. As we talk about standard process, let's think about it from a very simple, very, very simple perspective and start by saying what do we mean by process here? Obviously, it's a series of related activities. Generally, there's one or more inputs, and there are generally at least one output. Some of the processes don't have any outputs, but the deliverable out of the process is generally what I mean here when I'm talking about the output. They have a well-defined entrance and exit criteria. This is the first place where I see people not doing a very good job or not having a process definition that's very effective. If you don't know what the entrance and exit criteria are for your processes, it's time to stop and think about it. If you ask two different teams within your organization what we mean by done, what we discover is, say, for example, in the development area, some are going to say it includes the documentation, some say it doesn't. Some are going to say that that includes an integration test. Some will say, no, it's just the unit testing. We need to understand consistently what we mean by done so that as two organizations chat, they are talking about the same thing, that their understanding is crisp between the different organizations. Similarly, as we think about what are our input criteria, when should we start a process? And we should start, what are the deliverables that are prerequisites to a specific process? And they should be defined as part of the process definition. We also want to identify what metrics should be captured as a byproduct of doing the process and how we're going to capture them so that they are not additional work, but rather just part of the process. I see a lot of folks creating spreadsheets all over the place to capture metrics instead of saying what process are these metrics a activity within and making sure that those get collected. Now, what metrics are we talking about here? What are the most simple metrics? I wish I could see you and talk with you so we could have this as an interactive discussion, but what I'm talking about here is there are basic metrics